Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, has the identity for this Bucks team been discovered? And is it a throwback to when they found their most success? We'll dig into some numbers that may back up that claim and take a look at the corner this team appears to be turning. Camille and I dig into the latest schedule next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day and for subscribing to the Locked On Bucks newsletter. That's right. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter as we introduce the Locked On Bucks daily newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com. And start your day with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Camille, I mentioned, are we starting to discover some things about this Bucks team? And I think it really lies on the defensive side of the floor. You know, you go back to earlier in the year, Doc Rivers talking about we're still I'm not going to do the Doc Rivers voice. We're still trying to find our identity here. And, you know, it was a process searching for that. But as we watch not only that Rockets game Monday night, but these last 2 weeks, 20 days, 3 weeks now of Bucks basketball, do we think we found the identity? And is this identity back to a defensive team whose defense is good enough to keep you in games? They have some certain areas they're going to excel at. And you have a closer in Damian Lillard. You have Giannis. You may have a second closer in Chris Middleton, but you have enough. We'll get to the offense. It hasn't been good overall, but you have enough offensively and guys that you trust down the stretch, but your defense is going to lead you there and keep you in the game.
It's been better than what I thought that it could be. To your point about just how the Bucks have been playing over the last few weeks in particular, when I went to cleaning the glass and took a look at the numbers and just over the last 2 weeks for the Milwaukee Bucks, seeing that they had the number 5th defense in the league over the last 2 weeks was surprising to me, where I was like, I could see with my eyes that it was looking better, but I didn't think it was top 5 at that moment better without seeing the numbers behind it. And I think part of that comes from when you watch every game, every possession, and you're really dialed into the mistakes. The mistakes always seem to just gleam a little bit larger, not necessarily the things that you're seeing that are working well. And I think for me, that was part of why I was surprised to see that over the last 2 weeks, they've been a top 5 defense over that stretch. Because I think even that Houston game, where it was a great defensive effort from the team as a whole, AJ Green was moving his feet. I was on Blue Sky tweeting, or what do you say on Blue Sky? It's not tweeting. What is it? Like a skying? I don't know what the verb is for posting there. But just saying, like, AJ Green, really, really good defense, moving his feet well, the screen navigation, it was looking really good from him. And then you think about like the end of the game where you have AJ Green and Gary Trent Jr. being confused on who had the responsibility on that switch. They both followed Brooks in the corner. You see Green open by himself up top. You see Giannis try to recover it that way, leaving Sengun open at the butt. So things like that stand out. But then you look at just the whole picture and you're like, as I mentioned, like things seem like they're moving in the right place. And I think a large part of that is just finding the right combination of guys that are going to work and be able to do their job on the defensive end.
Yeah. We talked about this a decent amount coming into the season about, you know, Greg Buckner, what he did defensively with the Cavaliers, and you look at the personnel of Cleveland. Like, I'm not trying to say it's an exact match of Giannis and Brook versus Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. There's obviously a big age difference there, at least for two of the guys, but you could kind of envision it and say, okay, I kind of get, you know, obviously Doc Rivers talked about what drew him to Greg Buckner overall, but just looking at the personnel with Cleveland, like, yeah, I get where this makes sense. how they ran two bigs out there and played a certain way. You look at the perimeter defenders, you can certainly make a very strong case that the Cavs perimeter defenders are better than what the Bucks had certainly a year ago, but it's not elite. Isaac Okoro is knocking on that door, but outside of that, nobody views Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland as elite defenders. Max Strus is good enough, but that's kind of the makeup of, okay, we just don't have all of these weak spots. And I think that's a big part of what we've seen so far this season. Not only Greg Buckner bringing over some of what they did with Cleveland, but also minimizing your weaknesses. Like last year, it was one after another. When you looked at the perimeter of, okay, who do we turn to next? Well, we got to bring in this player. Well, there's some issues defensively. Part of this is the personnel moves that we talked about in the offseason where, one by one, all three signings, better players defensively and overall than the players that they replaced. And a big part of it, too, is the young guys. You mentioned AJ Green and what he's done defensively. Obviously, Andre Jackson Jr., that the Bucks have slowly started to just minimize those spots you can pick apart. I'm not saying they don't have any, but instead of having 3 or 4 sometimes of those guys on the floor at the same time, which we saw last year, we saw at times early this season, that's slowly dropped down to basically one, for the most part. And at most, there's 2 guys, which is still not great, but it's a far cry from what it was a year ago.
It is, and I do wonder if part of what we're seeing as well is just guys getting used to the scheme and what their defensive responsibilities are. Like we talked about that coming into the season, like, hey, it might look a little clunky for a few weeks while they're trying to understand what their responsibilities are. Doc Rivers mentioned it throughout training camp. Like he's asking guys to do things a little bit different than what they have been used to doing. And at times you can see Bucks players who have been here for a while, so the vets on the team, revert back to some old habits. So with that, I think part of it as well, in addition to what we've been talking about, is just guys starting to get more familiar with the scheme, what responsibilities are. And once you understand what your responsibilities are, as well as your teammates' responsibilities, you're able to play faster because you're not thinking as much about, wait, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Yeah. And understanding your assignment, understanding your role in it. You add that into the fact that a lot of the losses that the Bucks have taken that have bothered me the most came from the games where it felt like they weren't executing properly. And some execution is just the effort that goes along with it. Like when we talk about the transition defense, getting back, you can't jog, you can't play the game casual. This is a Bucks team that is older. Yes, they have the young pieces coming in to help inject some more energy, but as an older team that isn't as athletic as some of the other teams that they're going to be playing against, their margin for error when it comes to their effort, it's thin because you don't have the athleticism to kind of make up for it if you are taking off on a play or something like that. So for this Bucks team, a lot of it, in addition to getting used to the scheme, has been execution, just doing your job at a high level. Don't play casual. Play with the right pace, play with the right energy, and understand what your assignment is. And you're seeing all of that start to meld together with this team. Again, there are times where you see the mistakes show out. Not a perfect 48 from them defensively, but you're seeing more stretches of good defensive play from them than we were seeing earlier on in the season.
I understand that some of you listening or viewing this are probably going to say, like, are you guys crazy? You're really trying to sell me on defense being the identity for this group. But I think slowly that's what we're moving towards. And we have some numbers. I know you mentioned where they currently rank the last 2 weeks, Camille, but even beyond that, some numbers that I think will surprise a lot of people if you have not seen this for what the Bucks are doing. And more importantly, against the competition they're doing it against. I think that's the other caveat to add here. So we'll get into that conversation and take a look at the offense, because you can't mention, hey, the defense has been much better than we anticipated, without talking about some of the struggles we've seen on the other end of the floor. So we'll dive into that coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, it is time now to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel as we get ready to tackle NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL. So some of these numbers, Camille, and we'll get to the offense, but defensively, you mentioned the last 2 weeks, top 5 defense. Since November 1st, and this is another part that really matches the eye test for this team. Since November 1st, so that's now, I believe, 9 games. So we're excluding the first 5 of the season. And it caps off with the massacre in Memphis, basically. Since November 1st, the Bucks defensively are 6th best in the NBA with a 110.6 defensive rating. And I know I've preached it as much as anyone. Sample size matters. It's 9 games, not a huge sample size, but a lot of coaches like to view things in 10-game segments. So Billy Donovan, one of them, who we'll become more familiar with tomorrow. So we're almost there at that 10-game segment. But the other important part about all this, I think, is you look at those 9 games and what they include. 4 games against 3 of the top 4 offenses in the league, in the Cavs, the Celtics, and the New York Knicks. The Houston Rockets were 11th in offense. You got a game against them. It's not just tomato cans that the Bucks are playing here, and well, they're get-right games that you're fixing your defense. They've been tested defensively. And sure, you lost those 4 games against those teams that we mentioned, but I don't think you lost those games because of your defense. And I know I've talked about this on my post-game show on the radio. I think we've talked about it here too. The number one telltale sign, I know there's oftentimes a lot of, what would the word to use be for this, disdain? There's just a lot of skepticism over national media talking about the Bucks. Well, the number one way to differentiate, does this person actually watch the team and know what they're talking about, is if you continue to hear Bucks perimeter defense is this and that, and they're a mess and they can't fix it. Like, if you're still hearing that, you don't need to take that opinion seriously. This person is just looking at the standings and box scores, because their defense has not been a problem since November and really since that Memphis game. Sure, you had the Knicks game, wasn't great. But by and large, it has not been your defense. They have kept you in games. The numbers that we just pointed to there, a top 5 defense overall the last 2 weeks, top 6 in this month of November. It's the offense that's been the issue. And one last thing to throw out there before I get your thoughts here, Camille. I mentioned half court. They've been very good in half court defense since November, 5th best in the league. I think that's an important part to differentiate and call attention to, because we know transition defense is going to be an issue for this team. When Doc came in last year, that was their change, was they went from the league worst to just middle of the pack, somewhere 15 to 20. You can live with that if that's what they're going to give you with this group. But your half court defense has to be very good. It has been in November. It has been overall season to date. They are number 9 in half court defense for the full season, not just that 9-game sample size. And by comparison, last year, I think they finished 20th in the league, maybe 19th in half court defense. And in the Adrian Griffin era, they were, right where their overall defensive rating was, 23rd. So it wasn't this. It wasn't, okay, it's just, transition that's killing us. It was literally everything. So to me, that's another very encouraging sign of 5, maybe not, but improved defense and being in at least the top half of the league. This is very sustainable with this group.
It is. And I think that there is a pathway for the defense to get even stronger. I mean, we saw like the contributions defensively of someone like a Ryan Rollins, who was, it was unexpected to see him jump into the lineup the way that he did prior to his injury. But when you see like the defensive gifts that he does have with that long wingspan, 6'3" height, 6'10" wingspan, and you saw how he was able to bother those Raptors players during the last game that we saw him in, where he's literally hands up defense, able to just kind of take the ball out of people's hands, and it's the other way. We've been been seeing improved play from DeLon Wright, somebody who seems like he's just finding himself in more comfortable situations when it comes to his place defensively. We've been seeing how active that he is with his hands as well, with deflections, just ripping the ball away. Even Brook Lopez, like we've talked about Brook Lopez defensively quite some time, and just gave him so much praise and kudos for the way that he's able to defend the rim. But he's even been more active and taking more chances of just kind of putting his hand in there, trying to knock the ball away. We saw him get 3 steals last night against the Rockets. So it's this team as a whole is just kind of figuring out their place. And I love that defensively. If you would have told me that the offense would be struggling, I would have been like, well, maybe it's because of injuries and, given the construction of the team, which I do think plays a large part in it. But also we just have guys on the team that aren't shooting as well as what their career numbers suggest that they should be. A lot of guys have been missing open looks. Been a lot of conversation around Gary Trent Jr. And the way that he's been playing, what those numbers have looked like for him so far this season. Like on the season, he's shooting 32% from 3. And that's come up a lot because of the last couple of games that he's had. And he is a career 38% 3-point shooter. We've had Bobby Portis struggling from 3. We've had Dame have some struggles from 3, especially over the last couple of games for him. So you would think that if just some of the shooting variance returns with the looks that they're getting, the offense should start to improve. But also, again, they are missing. They've been missing some crucial pieces. Like the games without Dame really hurts. The Bucks don't really have that ball handler if Dame's not in the game, especially with Rollins out as well. So there have been just some really interesting lineups and things that I think have affected the offensive side of the ball. But if guys can knock down some of those open looks that they're getting, and also make sure they're taking the open looks when they're coming to them, not hesitating, not passing them up, not trying to be so unselfish where it becomes selfish because you had the best shot in that possession, I think you'll start to see things turn a bit for the team offensively as well.
Yeah, and I hate and hesitate to even bring it up because we know it's very polarizing. But Chris Middleton's absence is a big part of the offense. And as we've talked about, just what it's going to enable you to do. I mean, I think that's another part of this identity that we think this team has moved closer to discovering is the bench. And you think back to earlier in the year when Doc Rivers was talking about trying to find the right groupings. And, we haven't found the right mix yet of who plays with who and who comes in when, et cetera. Yesterday felt like, and beyond yesterday, the last couple of weeks felt like you're getting there, but a lot of it has to do with having more guys available. I thought a lot was made about Pat Connaughton not playing yesterday.
Surprised me.
Well, and Doc said after the game, this doesn't mean Pat Connaughton's out of the rotation, but we just like the way the guys were playing and defending, and that's what we went with. I think it's a pretty clear indication of where guys kind of sit in that as you start to get more guys back into the mix, it's going to take away some of those minutes. We talked about who's going to, be the most at risk when Chris Middleton comes back. Damian Lillard comes back and Pat Connaughton gets bumped out of the rotation. Ryan Rollins may be back tomorrow. He was shooting for quite a while after the game yesterday. Does that mean it's DeLon Wright? Because as you mentioned, he's been playing much better of late. Does it mean it's Andre Jackson, who's been starting but played, 6 minutes in yesterday's game? It's a good problem to have, to start to trust these guys more and more and see more plays on the defensive side of the floor that you can say, okay, maybe we don't play this guy today versus, well, we have to play this guy because no one else is available. And you just think about what the bench could potentially be. Gary Trent Jr. breaking out of this shooting slump. Bobby Portis, you're getting punch off the bench there. I know it has been brought up in some circles and with Bucks fans, should you bring Chris Middleton off the bench? I don't think it will happen, but I wouldn't immediately shut it down at this point just because of kind of working him back into the mix and what it does for your second unit and gives you more defensive capability around Damian Lillard and other guys. So it's all starting to fall into place. You just have to keep winning. And the schedule is very much in the Bucks' favor here over these next, 2 weeks when you look at things. So we'll take a closer look at that schedule, whether or not this team is, in fact, starting to turn the corner, and more looks at this offense and what we've seen from this group coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Prize Picks, the best way to get in on all the action. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. I said it's the best way to get in on the action because all you have to do is pick more than or less than. They offer weekly promos that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discount select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. If you think Steph Curry will get more than 4 3-pointers next week, or Anthony Edwards will have more than 27 points, cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this basketball season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. To get started, download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Locked On NBA is that code to use. And again, $50 instant bonus you get when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So the offense is, as we mentioned, and I don't know that it even warrants pointing out where the offense is so far committed. It's not good. Last I checked, I think they were 19th offensively. But yes, the offense has been where you would probably expect to see the defense. You did have 3 games without Damian Lillard. You did have 2 games without, as Doc Rivers described it, a living point guard. You've played all these games without Chris Middleton. You've had guys go through shooting slumps. I think our friend Van pointed out to what Brook Lopez and Gary Trent Jr. were able to do in terms of boosting their field goal percentage the last 2 or 3 games with what they've done. So that is some explanation. It is not all of the explanation. I do think in watching them play offensively, you can see what Doc Rivers was alluding to, because there's those flashes where the ball is popping, everything is moving, and man, they're generating good looks and this good offense, this beautiful basketball they're playing. And then you go through the other stretch where there's not ball movement, there's isolation quite a bit. It's one and done. It does seem to the naked eye like, and I don't mean this as a bad thing, there's not a whole lot being called. Like it's player driven.
That's what it looks like.
And Doc himself said, we're not installing this stuff because number one, Chris isn't there, but also we want these guys to have that freedom, but also have that experience to say, okay, this didn't work when we tried this. When you get into these situations, run on what the players are going to do. So I think that explains part of the clunkiness. I don't know that I would advocate for this to be the model go forward. Like once you get Chris back, I would assume there's going to be more sets and things that are run. But I think that explains some of it. To me, the bigger piece, and this ties into the defense as well, is guys are hitting shots now. Like we talked about, the offense can't put the defense in a bad spot. You saw a lot of that. And you haven't seen it largely for the last, 4 or 5 games now that Gary Trent Jr. is hitting shots. DeLon Wright is taking shots more and hitting them. So I think that has been a large part of what we've seen so far.
It has. And the piece of it with you pointing out, thinking the offense is a lot more player driven, I was thinking the same thing, where it looks like they're not necessarily running sets, but just running off of what they see out there and playing off of one another, which is part of why I think you see so many different dribble handoffs and them just trying to hunt different mismatches, trying to force switches and get what they believe is going to be an advantageous situation for them offensively. And with that, again, it comes down also as picking your spots. Like I know a point of consternation for a lot of Bucks fans is Bobby post-ups. And when he's doing it, how he's doing it, how frequently Bobby is posting up, how effective he's been doing it. And I saw some situations in the game against the Rockets where I'm like, this is exactly what I'm looking for here, where there's a clear mismatch. Bobby's in the post, you get it down to him, If he can't get the shot off, then he makes a play out of the post. And he had one, I think it was a 3 to Gary Trent. It was a 3 to somebody where he got doubled immediately. He knew to make the right play, pass the ball out, not go up with it in that situation. So with them being that player-led offense right now, or at least that's what it's looking like, they have to understand situationals of when to do certain things, when not to, and continue to develop that comfort with each other. And then too, with the different injuries that the team has been experiencing, there have been some lineups where it's like, I'm not sure how often we'll see this if the team was fully healthy, but this is what we're rocking with right now. So we got to figure it out. Like there have, especially when Dame was out, like there were just times where they just point guard Pat Connaughton was out there for this team. And that's not an effective way that you want to run your team. And to the point of whenever Chris Middleton does return, which knock on wood, I'm hoping Chris Middleton returns sometime soon, but him coming off the bench, I'm not necessarily sure I want to see him in that role as some other Bucks fans do. But to that point, Chris Middleton is going to be somebody who I see playing a lot with various bench units as well, kind of just anchoring them, being that other ball maker or ball handler, playmaker for the team. So his absence does loom large for this offense, as we've pointed out. But in addition to that, guys have gotten more comfortable, as we've talked about, understanding when to shoot, why not to shoot, what to do, making those quick decisions, something that Doc has talked about. He wants to see guys make quick decisions with the ball in their hands. And when you see the team doing that, you see the ball movement, you see things flowing. But when that ball starts to stick is when you start to see the problems with this offense, which isn't new to this season. That was something that we were talking about a lot last season as well. Just they understand what it looks like when it's working right. And being able to do that consistently, as Doc has said, just for this Bucks team, sustaining play is the piece of it for them, where you can see them do things in little spurts, but need to see it over a sustained game. And for this team, just stacking sustained games of good play, which we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks. And like, can you continue to build upon what you've been building so far?
Yeah, and Brook Lopez has been so huge for this team too. We've seen spurts of not post up Brook, but more twos. He's hitting threes, which that's another thing of the Chris Middleton piece, that there's just a certain segment that you're never going to be Chris guys. And we get it. And Camille and I are kind of sick of fighting that battle.
Yep.
It's the same with Brook Lopez, that there's a certain segment of he shoots too many threes and this and that. And you need it. You need Brook Lopez to hit them, but you need him to take them and play out there to create more space for Giannis. We've talked about Giannis and his efficiency, what he's really doing to work on that mid-range shot. And again, it didn't go down against the Hornets. He had a second half again against the Rockets, didn't go down quite at the same volume, but it's important to continue to take those, to have that as something that he can go to. He's started to hit that little push baby hook a little bit more. The one-legged Dirk turnaround jumper starting to go down a little bit more as well. So adding those things is going to continue to be very important for this team. But it's not reinventing the wheel. It's the same thing with every team. The more this team moves the ball, the better their offense looks. And I think really the Bucks at this point, maybe as much as any other team, the less they do it, the more things shift in the other direction. As we start to wrap up here, speaking of Brook Lopez, and I understand this is the dictionary definition of cherry picking statistics, Camille. So I'll get that out of the way. But there are only, let me make sure I have this right. Yes, there are only 7 instances in NBA history of a player having 4 or more blocked shots, 3 or more steals, and 5 or more threes in a single game. Brook Lopez has 3 of those 7, including last night against the Houston Rockets. So he's been incredible this season. When we talked about trying to find that identity defensively with the rim protection and your twin towers, but you mentioned his hands and how active he's been, starting some transition opportunities, poking the ball out of there. He's been fantastic. And I know there's numbers that say it's not quite as good with Brook on the floor as it's been in years past defensively for this Bucks team. I think there's a lot that goes into it. And as we said, still small samples. We are seeing opponents still continue to get shots at the rim. that's inevitable, right? With where things are headed for the league and this Bucks team, you're getting them from two spots, but we have seen this group really start to anchor down now. Brook Lopez is a big part of it, and I think really, especially in those closing situations, Brook Lopez and Giannis, what they have been able to do. Giannis especially. I
Yeah.
mean, we talk about Brook and how great he's been. You think about the individual defensive plays Giannis has already made this season. You saw two of them against the Houston Rockets. We've seen them repeatedly against the Pistons over and over, that it is looking like vintage Giannis defensively. And we talked about this a couple games ago. Not that you're ever going to tell Giannis, be the second or third option. You know,
Right.
we're good with it. But at what point does the conversation start to become, hey, we need you to be elite defensively? If that means you're taking a little bit of a step back or a back seat to Damian Lillard and whoever else is hot, maybe that's what we're going to ask of you, but we need you to really take over defensively because of some of the things that we're making up for. And it really does feel like that's what we've seen these last, 4 or so games from Giannis.
And it's important for that to happen with Giannis in the regards of his defensive play being what we've seen over the last few games from him. Because when he is that guy, he can change a game with his defense alone. Like, he is such an impactful defensive player that when he's fully engaged and he knows what he should be doing, he's not ball watching, he's not getting lost, he's not so tired on a possession where he's kind of just standing somewhere. See, like, oh man, I'm supposed to close out on this shot, but I'm gonna let you have it real quick and just hope that it misses. In those moments when you're seeing Giannis fully engaged and locked in, you can see again why that man's a former defensive player of the year. You think back to some of just the spectacular defensive highlights that he's had, and you see it's still in the bag. Like, there have been conversations around slippage from Giannis defensively as well. And maybe he is not the same guy that he was 5 years ago, but that does not mean that he cannot be an impactful defensive player at this particular stage. And to your point of maybe the Bucks have to lean on him a little bit heavier defensively, I think even if that is the case, because of Giannis's game, he's still going to find a way to get his. It might not be 30, 33 a game, might be more like 25, 27 a game. But for Giannis, like, he's still going to be able to find ways to be really effective. And you've seen him give up that control in the last second offensively to Dame and let him initiate, like him make the decisions. We saw it against Houston. He gets the block. He gives the ball to Dame right away. Like, go ahead, whatever you choose to do, I trust in it. And with that type of trust in Dame and Dame understanding, like, I'm here to set up everybody else, find the best shot on the floor. It's a partnership that can work in that way. But the Bucks are going to need a lot from Giannis defensively, because even when you think of the scheme that Bucks trying to run and what was done in Cleveland, it's based off those two twin towers really cleaning a lot up, really being the anchors defensively. So it's going to be a lot defensively on the shoulders of Brook Lopez and on Giannis to continue to go forward for this team to reach the defensive heights that they want to. Of course, point of attack defense is important, because if you can have strong point of attack defense, it makes things easier on the back end for those big guys as well. So you want everything to work together. But yeah, Giannis is definitely a crucial part in all of that.
Yeah, and it's going to be big for this team to continue to dig out of where they're currently at. I mean, I don't want to speak too soon here, but that's, I think, the encouraging thing for this Bucks team is that it does appear they've at least stopped the digging when it comes to the hole. Like, now it's a matter of climbing out of that hole, because we've seen other teams, not going to name anyone.
I will, the Sixers.
It seems like they're still digging that hole, but the Bucks have stopped that. The schedule is favorable, not only, location, but the teams that they're playing. And as we said, great, but you still got to win those games. Like, the process has been improved, but you got to start to see the results, and we're seeing it. So it's another one of those games with the Bulls tonight. And it's another one of those games Friday with the Indiana Pacers, who we'll take a closer look at it as we move to that game. But Pacers are another one of those teams that it's just, man, something doesn't feel right so far. And if you don't think, I know it's a regular season game, but if you don't think there is added motivation for the Bucks and every single member of this team that was on the Bucks a year ago that does not forget the 5 regular season games, the semifinals of the NBA Cup, the first round playoff series, I think you are sorely mistaken. So that is, we said it, Camille, when the schedule came out, that was one of the first that you circled of, I cannot wait for this. And despite the record for both of these teams, my stance has not changed on that.
Not at all. The Bucks got to get their look back. They got to get the look back on the Pacers, and that's going to start tonight as well against the Bulls. A game that, when you look back at this early season so far, is one of those games that stands out as a could have been better. How did you lose this game? So for the Bucks team, I'm hoping to see them come out with just a better focus, see what we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks in regards to the defensive effort, and hopefully you can continue seeing the shots get knocked down for this Bucks team against the Bulls. So we got to start there. Get that win, try to stack that. They've won 3 of their last 4 at this point. Want that to be 4 of their last 5 after the Bulls game. And as we wrap up, I will say as well, I will be at the Bulls game live in the building. So if you see me every dayers, make sure that you say, hey, say what's up, and let's chop it up about the Bucks in person as well.
I did. I'm assuming it's an everydayer as we wrap here. I did see somebody was sitting right in front of our seats where Dave Kane and I called the game. And what game was this? This was, it may have been the Celtics game. And they kind of turned to talk to me and said, hey, you're him. And like, yes, I am. I would encourage you, like, same as Camille said, when you see me at the arena, come up and say hello, just not during the game when we're actually calling the action, because this was during a play that occurred. So any other time is perfectly fine. A big one tonight, though, to keep the train moving here for the Bucks in another border battle, get some revenge from the Bulls as well. The Bucks and the Bulls. Make note of the tip time, 6:30 for these next 2 games for the Bucks, 6:30 in Milwaukee. We will, of course, have the post-game recap afterwards, hopefully talking about the success extending for the Bucks. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.